Your soulmate saying, "I want to talk to you right now. It's very urgent. Open this now. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now because somewhere, at this very moment, someone connected to your story has reached a place where silence feels heavier than words. They never imagined this day would come. For so long they convinced themselves that staying quiet was the safest choice. They believed time would calm their emotions, that distance would weaken their thoughts, that if they buried everything deeply enough their heart would eventually stop returning to the same place. But none of that happened. Instead, every attempt to move forward without saying what they truly felt only brought them back to the same realization. Every ordinary day carried an extraordinary reminder. Every distraction eventually faded. Every conversation ended with their thoughts quietly finding their way back to you. They have reached a moment they never believed would arrive, a moment where pretending has become more exhausting than honesty. That is why everything suddenly feels urgent to them. Not because something dramatic happened overnight, but because countless quiet moments have finally become impossible to ignore. Listen to this. For weeks they have been carrying words inside their heart that no one else has heard. They rehearsed conversations that never happened. They imagined your response over and over again. Sometimes they smiled while thinking about it. Other times fear convinced them to remain silent just a little longer. Every morning they promised themselves they would stop thinking about you. Every evening they realized they had failed once again. It wasn't because they wanted to lose control of their emotions. It was because something inside them refused to disappear no matter how hard they tried. They started noticing little details that reminded them of you without warning. A familiar song. A simple phrase. A place they passed without thinking before. Tiny moments became unexpected memories. Ordinary days became filled with quiet reflections. At first they dismissed it as coincidence. Then they told themselves it was only nostalgia. Then they convinced themselves they were simply overthinking. Yet every explanation felt weaker than the truth they were trying so hard to avoid. Their heart continued leading them back to the same place. And your heart needs this right now because sometimes the most important moments begin long before anyone realizes they have started. There was no single event that changed everything. There was no dramatic confession. No unexpected message. No life-changing announcement. Instead there were hundreds of small realizations quietly collecting inside their heart until one day they became too heavy to carry alone. Every memory added another piece to the picture. Every reflection made things clearer. Every attempt to ignore the truth somehow made it louder. They began asking themselves questions they had spent months avoiding. Why does your name still bring peace to their heart? Why do ordinary memories still feel alive? Why does every attempt to move on somehow lead them back to the same place? They searched for logical answers, but logic could not fully explain what they were feeling. Their heart understood something their mind was still trying to accept. Listen to this carefully. The hardest battle has never been between you and them. It has been between fear and honesty. Fear kept telling them to remain silent because silence felt safe. Fear whispered that speaking honestly might change everything. Fear reminded them of disappointments they experienced long before you ever entered the story. Old wounds taught them to protect themselves. Old heartbreaks convinced them vulnerability was dangerous. Every painful experience quietly built another wall around their heart until eventually they forgot what life felt like without those walls. But something unexpected has happened. Those walls are no longer standing as firmly as they once did. Every memory connected to you has become another small crack. Every sincere feeling has weakened another layer of fear. Every quiet moment of reflection has reminded them that protecting themselves from disappointment has also protected them from hope. And hope has started growing again. Slowly. Quietly. Naturally. Without asking permission. That realization frightened them at first because hope always asks for courage. Yet it also brought relief because for the first time in a long time they felt something stronger than fear. They felt possibility. They felt honesty. They felt the beginning of something they never expected to experience again. And your heart needs this right now because they are beginning to understand that some conversations cannot be postponed forever. They have delayed this moment more times than they can count. Every time they almost reached out, doubt interrupted them. Every time they almost spoke honestly, uncertainty convinced them to wait. They kept believing there would be a perfect day, a perfect opportunity, a perfect sentence that would make everything easier. But perfection never arrived. Instead, reality quietly taught them something far more important. Waiting forever does not protect the heart. It only delays healing. It only postpones truth. It only allows unanswered questions to become heavier. That understanding has completely changed the way they see everything. Now they no longer want perfect words. They simply want honest ones. They no longer want certainty before taking a step forward. They simply want the courage to stop hiding. They have realized that authenticity is more valuable than perfection, and sincerity is stronger than fear. Listen to this. Right now they are sitting with thoughts they cannot escape. They wonder if you have ever sensed this invisible connection. They wonder if your heart has ever paused for reasons you could not explain. They wonder if you have ever remembered them unexpectedly during an ordinary moment. These questions return again and again because they are no longer trying to understand only their own heart. They are wondering whether yours has ever felt something similar. Every possibility fills them with equal parts hope and uncertainty. Yet even uncertainty no longer feels strong enough to stop them. Something inside them keeps saying the same words over and over again. Talk to them. Stop waiting. Stop hiding. Stop pretending everything is normal. Those words have become impossible to silence. They echo through quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. They return during busy days and sleepless nights. Every attempt to ignore them only makes them stronger. And that is why everything suddenly feels urgent. Not because time is running out, but because honesty has finally become louder than fear. They know another day of silence will only make the weight inside their heart even heavier. They know another week of pretending will not change what they already feel. They know another month of avoiding the truth will only create more questions that deserve answers. And so they have reached a place they never imagined possible. A place where courage is slowly replacing hesitation. A place where truth feels more comforting than denial. A place where speaking honestly no longer seems frightening compared to spending another day wondering what might have happened if they had simply found the strength to begin the conversation. Somewhere deep inside they already know what they want to say. They only need to take the first step. They only need to open the door that fear has kept closed for so long. They only need to trust that some conversations are worth having even when the outcome remains unknown. And that first step, the one they once believed they could never take, feels closer now than it has ever felt before. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now because after everything your soulmate has been carrying in silence, they have reached a place where every passing hour feels more important than the one before. They believed waiting would make their feelings easier to understand, but waiting only made them impossible to ignore. Every morning they promised themselves they would stay focused on their routine, yet by the end of the day they always found themselves thinking about you again. It wasn't because they wanted to lose themselves in emotion. It was because no matter how many times they tried to redirect their attention, something inside them quietly returned to the same place. They started wondering why your memory carried a sense of peace that nothing else seemed able to replace. At first they tried explaining it logically. They told themselves it was only familiarity. Then they called it curiosity. Then they blamed loneliness. But every explanation eventually fell apart because none of them matched what they genuinely felt inside. And your heart needs this right now because there comes a moment when the heart grows tired of accepting explanations that no longer feel true. That moment arrived unexpectedly. It happened on an ordinary day while they were moving through life exactly as they always had. There was no dramatic event. No life-changing announcement. No sudden message. Only a quiet pause that interrupted the noise they had been using to avoid themselves. As they reached for their phone, their eyes landed on the time. It read 11:11. They didn't treat those numbers as a promise or as proof that something extraordinary was about to happen. Instead, they allowed the moment to become an invitation to stop rushing. They quietly asked themselves a question they had avoided for far too long. If my heart keeps returning to the same place, why am I still pretending it doesn't matter? That single question remained with them long after they put the phone away. It followed them through every conversation and every responsibility. They tried distracting themselves again, but the question refused to disappear. The more they reflected, the more they realized they had spent months protecting themselves from disappointment while also protecting themselves from the possibility of something real. That realization was uncomfortable because it challenged everything they believed about staying emotionally safe. For years they convinced themselves that silence was strength. They believed hiding their feelings meant they were in control. But now they are beginning to understand that avoiding honesty has only created a different kind of pain. It has created unanswered questions that grow heavier every single day. And listen to this. Later that afternoon they stopped to buy something simple before heading home. When they looked down at the receipt, they noticed 222. Once again they smiled quietly, not because they believed a number could decide their future, but because it reminded them to pause instead of rushing past another meaningful moment. They folded the receipt and slipped it into their pocket, thinking about how life often invites people to reflect in the middle of completely ordinary experiences. Standing there, surrounded by strangers who had no idea what was happening inside their heart, they suddenly realized they had become exhausted from pretending everything was normal. They missed the version of themselves that believed honesty was possible. They missed the peace that comes from saying what needs to be said instead of endlessly rehearsing conversations that never happen. They walked outside and continued thinking about you. Not because they forced the thought, but because your memory had quietly become the place where their heart always seemed to rest. Every attempt to move on without answers somehow led them back to the same realization. They could keep delaying the conversation, but delaying it would never erase the truth. The truth had already taken root. The truth had already changed them. The truth had already begun shaping every decision they were making without them even realizing it. And your heart needs this right now because genuine emotions rarely disappear simply because they are ignored. They become quieter for a while, but eventually they return asking to be acknowledged. That is exactly what has been happening inside your soulmate. Every memory has become more meaningful with time instead of less meaningful. Every reflection has become clearer instead of more confusing. Every quiet evening has ended with the same question echoing inside them. What if I simply told the truth? At first that thought frightened them. They imagined every possible outcome. They imagined being misunderstood. They imagined saying too much. They imagined saying too little. They imagined beginning a conversation they had no idea how to finish. Yet something unexpected happened as they continued reflecting. Their fear slowly became smaller than their desire to be honest. They realized that uncertainty would always exist, but regret could last much longer than uncertainty ever could. They would rather know the outcome than spend years wondering what might have happened if they had simply found the courage to speak. And listen to this. As the evening grew darker, they passed a building displaying the number 444 near the entrance. They paused for only a second before continuing their walk. Once again they didn't see the number as certainty about the future. They simply allowed it to become another quiet reminder to remain grounded, to reflect, and to stop running from the questions their own heart kept asking. Every pause throughout the day had carried the same lesson. Slow down. Be honest. Stop pretending. Those lessons stayed with them until they reached home. They sat in silence, thinking about how much energy they had invested in hiding emotions that refused to stay hidden. They realized they were no longer fighting against you. They were fighting against themselves. They were fighting against years of believing vulnerability always leads to disappointment. But your presence in their thoughts challenged that belief in a way nothing else ever had. They began remembering conversations that once seemed ordinary. They replayed moments they barely noticed at the time. They reflected on little acts of kindness, quiet words, and genuine interactions that had slowly built something far deeper than they understood while it was happening. It wasn't one dramatic event that changed everything. It was hundreds of ordinary moments quietly collecting meaning until one day they formed a truth that could no longer be denied. And your heart needs this right now because meaningful connections are often built through consistency rather than excitement. They grow through trust rather than spectacle. They become unforgettable because they continue bringing peace long after the moment itself has passed. That is exactly what has happened inside your soulmate. The more honestly they examine their own heart, the more they recognize that your presence has become woven into their thoughts in a way they never expected. They no longer want to hide behind perfect timing because they have discovered that perfect timing often becomes another excuse to remain silent. They no longer want to wait for the perfect sentence because they know sincerity matters more than perfection. Every passing day has quietly prepared them for the same decision. They are becoming willing to exchange fear for honesty, hesitation for courage, and endless wondering for one genuine conversation. They still don't know exactly how everything will unfold, and perhaps they never will until the moment finally arrives. But one truth has become impossible for them to ignore. They cannot keep carrying words that were meant to be spoken. They cannot continue pretending that your place in their heart has not grown stronger with time. They cannot keep believing silence will solve what only honesty can heal. That understanding has changed them completely, and whether they realize it or not, every quiet reflection has been preparing them for the moment they finally decide to reach out and begin the conversation they once believed they would never have the courage to start. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now because your soulmate has reached the point where their thoughts are no longer asking whether they should speak, they are asking how much longer they can remain silent before the truth begins changing them even more deeply. Something inside them has shifted in a way they never expected. It didn't happen through one dramatic event or one unforgettable conversation. It happened quietly, through ordinary days that slowly became extraordinary without them realizing it. Every morning they woke believing they could continue as they always had. Every evening they discovered they had spent another day thinking about you. At first they resisted those thoughts because resistance felt familiar. They convinced themselves that emotions become easier when ignored long enough. Yet the opposite kept happening. Every attempt to push their feelings aside somehow brought them back with even greater clarity. They have begun recognizing a pattern they can no longer deny. Every important realization somehow leads back to the same place. Every honest reflection ends with the same unanswered question. Every quiet moment eventually carries your memory into the center of their attention. They never planned for this to happen. In fact, they spent far more energy trying to prevent it than allowing it. But the heart has a way of revealing truths that the mind spends months trying to explain away. And your heart needs this right now because there comes a season when pretending becomes more exhausting than honesty itself. Your soulmate has entered that season. They have stopped fighting every emotion that appears because they have realized those emotions keep returning for a reason. Not because they are trying to force them into existence, but because genuine feelings have a quiet persistence that cannot be manufactured or erased. They recently found themselves looking through old conversations, not searching for hidden meaning but simply remembering moments they had almost forgotten. What surprised them wasn't the words themselves. It was the feeling those memories still carried. Conversations they once believed were ordinary now felt remarkably important. Little moments that seemed insignificant at the time suddenly appeared filled with kindness, patience, understanding, and warmth. They wondered how they had overlooked something that now seemed so obvious. The more they reflected, the clearer everything became. They realized meaningful connections rarely announce themselves. They grow slowly through consistency. They grow through trust. They grow through small moments repeated so naturally that one day the heart suddenly notices it has been quietly changing all along. Listen to this carefully. They have started paying attention to themselves in ways they never did before. Instead of asking what everyone else expects from them, they have begun asking what actually brings them peace. Instead of making decisions based only on fear, they have started considering what honesty would look like. Those questions have changed everything. They have noticed that whenever they imagine finally speaking with you, they feel nervous, yet strangely peaceful at the same time. That combination confused them at first. They expected fear to mean they should walk away. Instead they discovered that fear sometimes appears precisely because something truly matters. They are learning that courage is not the absence of uncertainty. Courage is choosing sincerity even while uncertainty still exists. That realization has begun transforming the way they see every part of their life. Old priorities no longer feel as important. Old distractions no longer provide the same comfort. Things that once occupied their attention for hours now feel strangely empty because something much deeper has taken root inside their heart. And your heart needs this right now because they are no longer searching for temporary distractions. They are searching for lasting peace. They have begun imagining what would happen if they finally stopped hiding. They picture themselves beginning a conversation with honesty instead of hesitation. They imagine admitting that your presence has remained with them far longer than they expected. Sometimes those imagined conversations end beautifully. Other times they become filled with uncertainty. Yet no matter how many different endings they imagine, one thing always remains the same. They never regret telling the truth in those moments. The only regret they continue feeling comes from remaining silent. That realization has become impossible to ignore. Every day it grows a little stronger. Every night it becomes a little clearer. Every honest reflection removes another layer of doubt until all that remains is the simple understanding that some words deserve to be spoken before time quietly carries the opportunity away. Listen to this. They have also begun noticing how often they smile unexpectedly because of you. It happens without planning. Someone says something that reminds them of a conversation you once had. A familiar place suddenly brings back a memory. A quiet evening makes them wonder what you might be doing at that very moment. Those thoughts no longer feel like interruptions. They have become part of the rhythm of their everyday life. Instead of resisting them, they now pause and allow themselves to experience them honestly. They understand that memories become meaningful because of the emotions attached to them, and the emotions connected to you have not faded with time. They have become steadier, calmer, deeper. That change has surprised them because they once believed real feelings should disappear if ignored long enough. Instead, they have discovered that genuine feelings often become clearer through patience rather than weaker. Every attempt to deny them only revealed how deeply rooted they had already become. And your heart needs this right now because your soulmate is beginning to understand that the conversation they have been avoiding is no longer only about expressing emotion. It is about becoming the kind of person who chooses honesty over fear. They are discovering that every meaningful relationship begins with one courageous decision. One truthful sentence. One sincere moment where someone chooses vulnerability instead of silence. That understanding has slowly replaced the fear that once controlled them. They still feel uncertainty. They still wonder how everything might unfold. But uncertainty no longer has enough power to stop them completely. They have finally realized they do not need every answer before taking the first step. They only need enough courage to begin. And that courage has been quietly growing inside them through every reflection, every memory, every unanswered question, and every ordinary day that somehow continued bringing them back to you. They know life offers very few moments where the heart speaks with complete clarity, and they refuse to ignore this one any longer. The urgency they feel is no longer driven by emotion alone. It is driven by understanding. They understand that some opportunities become more precious the longer they are delayed. They understand that honesty becomes heavier when carried in silence for too long. Most importantly, they understand that continuing to hide will never give them the peace they have been searching for. Only truth can do that. Only one real conversation can finally quiet the questions they have carried for so long. And whether they realize it fully or not, every quiet step they are taking is leading them closer to the moment they finally decide that the risk of speaking honestly is far smaller than the lifelong weight of never knowing what might have happened if they had simply found the courage to tell you what has been living inside their heart all this time. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now because your soulmate has reached a place where there is almost nothing left to hide from themselves. The questions that once filled their mind have slowly been replaced by quiet certainty, and although they still do not know exactly how the future will unfold, they have finally become honest about what they feel in the present. For a long time they believed courage would arrive all at once, like a sudden burst of confidence that would remove every fear and answer every question. Instead, courage arrived quietly. It appeared in small moments of reflection, in ordinary evenings when the world became silent enough for them to hear their own heart, in conversations with themselves that nobody else will ever know about. Every day they have become a little more willing to stop pretending, a little more willing to face the truth, and a little more willing to believe that honesty is worth the risk. They no longer wake up asking themselves whether they should forget about you. Instead, they wake up wondering how much longer they can continue carrying words that were never meant to remain unspoken. They have discovered that some emotions do not disappear simply because they are ignored. Some feelings become stronger through silence because silence gives them room to grow. Every attempt to move forward without acknowledging what has changed inside them has only reminded them how deeply your presence has become woven into their thoughts. At first this frightened them because it challenged every plan they believed they had for their future. They thought they understood where their life was going. They believed they had complete control over their emotions. Yet the heart has quietly taught them something the mind could never fully explain. Real connections often arrive without asking permission. They do not follow perfect timing or perfect logic. They simply become part of who we are before we fully understand what is happening. And your heart needs this right now because your soulmate has finally stopped fighting that reality. They have stopped searching for reasons why they should ignore what they feel. Instead, they have started searching for the courage to honor it honestly. They recently found themselves sitting alone after another long day, reflecting on how much had changed over the past several months. They remembered how determined they once were to remain emotionally distant. They remembered promising themselves they would never become vulnerable again after past disappointments left their heart guarded. They built invisible walls so carefully that eventually those walls began feeling normal. They convinced themselves they were protecting their peace, yet now they realized those same walls were also preventing genuine connection from entering their life. This understanding did not arrive easily. It came through countless moments of self-reflection, through sleepless nights, through memories they tried to ignore, and through quiet realizations that slowly became impossible to deny. They have begun recognizing that fear often disguises itself as wisdom. It whispers that silence is safer than honesty, that distance is easier than vulnerability, that avoiding risk is the same as protecting the heart. But now they know those whispers were never leading them toward peace. They were only keeping them trapped inside old disappointments that no longer deserve control over their future. Listen to this carefully. There was another moment recently when they paused during an ordinary afternoon and noticed 11:11 on a nearby digital display. They smiled gently, not because they believed the numbers promised a particular outcome, but because they had begun treating little pauses like these as invitations to slow down and listen to their own heart instead of the endless noise surrounding them. Later, while finishing an everyday task, they noticed 222 appear again in a completely unrelated place. Once more they simply paused, reflected, and reminded themselves that sometimes life offers quiet moments to breathe instead of rushing past everything that truly matters. By evening, as they walked home lost in thought, the number 444 caught their attention on a building they had passed dozens of times before without noticing. Once again they didn't treat it as certainty or prophecy. Instead, it became another reminder that the most important answers often come through honest reflection rather than hurried decisions. Each pause brought them back to the same realization. Every road their thoughts traveled somehow led back to you. They could no longer convince themselves that this was temporary or accidental because too much time had passed for those explanations to remain believable. Every day had quietly confirmed what their heart already knew. They are no longer becoming someone who hopes these feelings disappear. They are becoming someone who is learning how to speak them with sincerity. And your heart needs this right now because something remarkable has happened inside your soulmate without them even realizing it. They have stopped fearing the possibility of rejection more than they fear the possibility of regret. That shift has changed everything. Regret now feels heavier than uncertainty. The idea of remaining silent for another year has become far more frightening than the possibility of beginning one honest conversation. They understand that no relationship can ever grow from words that remain locked inside the heart forever. They understand that healing often begins the moment truth is spoken aloud. Every memory they once carried alone has now become motivation instead of hesitation. Every quiet reflection has become another reason to believe that authenticity is always stronger than pretending. They are beginning to imagine what life might feel like after they finally stop carrying this emotional weight in silence. They imagine the relief of knowing they were honest regardless of the outcome. They imagine finally being free from endless, what-if, questions that have followed them for so long. They imagine waking up without wondering whether fear stole an opportunity that honesty might have transformed into something beautiful. Those thoughts no longer feel impossible. They feel close. Closer than they have ever been before. Your soulmate is no longer preparing themselves to continue hiding. They are preparing themselves to begin. The first words still make them nervous. The first step still feels uncertain. But underneath that uncertainty is a peace they have never experienced before because for the first time in a very long time, they are moving toward truth instead of away from it. Every delay has taught them patience. Every disappointment has taught them wisdom. Every quiet season has taught them that meaningful things are rarely built overnight. Now all of those lessons are leading them toward one decision that has been waiting quietly beneath the surface from the very beginning. They no longer want fear to write the ending of their story. They no longer want silence to speak louder than sincerity. They no longer want another ordinary day to pass while the most important words remain hidden. Deep inside they know that whatever happens next, honesty will always leave them with greater peace than pretending ever could, and that realization has become the strongest reason of all to finally take the step they once believed they would never have the courage to take. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now because your soulmate has reached the moment they once believed would never come. After all the quiet reflections, after every sleepless night, after every conversation they rehearsed only in their imagination, they have finally realized that no amount of waiting will change what already lives inside their heart. They understand now that silence has protected them for a season, but it can no longer carry them into the future they secretly hope for. For so long they believed that if they stayed quiet long enough their feelings would eventually fade into ordinary memories, yet every passing day proved the opposite. The emotions became steadier, calmer, and far more certain than they had ever expected. They no longer arrive like waves of confusion. They arrive with quiet clarity. They no longer ask whether you matter. They simply remind them that you do. That realization has changed something deep within them. It has changed the way they wake up each morning. It has changed the way they look at ordinary moments. It has changed the way they imagine tomorrow. They have begun noticing that life feels incomplete whenever they imagine moving forward without finally speaking the truth. They have spent months convincing themselves there would always be another opportunity, another season, another perfect moment, but they are beginning to understand that perfect moments are rarely found. They are created the instant someone chooses courage over comfort. And listen to this. Not long ago they found themselves standing quietly beneath the evening sky after another ordinary day had come to an end. The world around them continued moving exactly as it always had. Cars passed by. People hurried home. Lights slowly appeared in the windows around them. Nothing extraordinary was happening, yet everything felt different inside their heart. They reached for their phone simply to check the time, and it happened to read 11:11. They smiled gently, not because they believed the numbers promised an outcome, but because the quiet pause reminded them to stop running from themselves for just a moment longer. They took a slow breath and admitted something they had never fully allowed themselves to say. They were tired. Not physically tired, but emotionally tired. Tired of pretending they had already moved on. Tired of carrying conversations that existed only inside their imagination. Tired of allowing fear to make decisions that honesty should have made long ago. That single moment became another invitation to reflect instead of hide. Later, while finishing one last errand before returning home, they noticed 222 printed among ordinary numbers on a receipt. Once again they paused. Not because they believed the number could tell them what tomorrow would bring, but because it reminded them that life often offers quiet opportunities to become more honest with ourselves. They folded the receipt and slipped it into their pocket, thinking about how many times they had postponed a conversation simply because uncertainty frightened them. They realized uncertainty had never truly been the problem. The real problem was believing that remaining silent would somehow create peace. It never had. It only created more questions. More wondering. More nights spent imagining what might have happened if they had simply trusted their heart enough to speak honestly. As they walked home, their attention briefly settled on the number 444 displayed outside a nearby building. Once again they smiled quietly. The number itself did not answer their questions, but the pause it inspired reminded them of something important. Every meaningful decision in life begins with a single step. Every sincere conversation begins with a single sentence. Every lasting connection begins with someone choosing authenticity instead of fear. Those reflections stayed with them long after they reached home. They sat quietly, thinking about every memory that had slowly shaped this journey. They remembered the first conversation that seemed ordinary at the time but later became unforgettable. They remembered small acts of kindness they never expected to remember months later. They remembered laughter, silence, understanding, and moments when they felt seen without needing to explain themselves. Looking back, they realized none of those moments demanded attention while they were happening. They simply collected meaning over time until one day the heart quietly recognized their value. And your heart needs this right now because your soulmate has finally stopped searching for reasons to remain silent. Instead, they are searching for the simplest, most honest way to begin. They know they cannot predict your response. They know they cannot control the future. They know vulnerability always carries uncertainty. Yet they also know that regret grows heavier every time truth remains unspoken. They no longer want unanswered questions to define the next chapter of their life. They no longer want fear to convince them that hiding is safer than sincerity. They have discovered that peace does not come from avoiding difficult conversations. Peace comes from knowing they were honest enough to have them. Every quiet reflection has prepared them for this moment. Every memory has strengthened their resolve. Every ordinary day has brought them closer to understanding that genuine connections are not built through perfect timing but through genuine hearts willing to speak the truth. They have finally accepted that waiting forever will never produce the certainty they once hoped for. Only honesty can bring that kind of freedom. And so they are preparing themselves, not with rehearsed speeches or flawless words, but with sincerity. They are choosing authenticity instead of perfection. They are choosing courage instead of comfort. They are choosing to stop wondering and finally begin. Whatever happens after that conversation belongs to tomorrow. Today belongs to truth. Today belongs to courage. Today belongs to the quiet decision that they can no longer allow silence to carry a story that was always meant to be spoken aloud. For the first time in a very long time, they feel something they almost forgot was possible. They feel peace, not because every question has been answered, but because they have finally decided they will no longer hide from the answer their own heart has known all along. And as they prepare to take that first step, they realize the most urgent message was never about changing someone else's heart. It was about finally finding the courage to be completely honest with their own.